China is a prehistoric culture that dates back about 4,000 years. The compass, gunpowder, paper, and printing are some of the most significant inventions ever made thanks to them. However, China was also the home to some of the most evil emperors who were able to command and carry out actions that were so heinous and barbaric that they are beyond comprehension. The worst examples are shown below. Gao Yang, a notorious drunkard who reigned over the northern Xi from 529 to 559, was the monarch. Yang wasn't always a bad drunk. In fact, he got his reign off to a successful start by enhancing the capabilities of the Qi military and lowering taxes. As a matter of fact, the northern Xi quickly rose to the top of China, winning everyone's respect. Yang began to enjoy his favorite activity more and more as his kingdom expanded as a way to mark the stability he had brought to the region. Later in life, Yang's binge drinking turned him from a revered statesman into a deranged lunatic whose heinous deeds became a common occurrence in court life. Yang's desire for ladies drove him to have a clandestine relationship with his wife's sister, concubine Siyue. He gave the famous Chinese prince and her former lover Gao the order to kill himself out of jealousy. But Yang quickly grew bored of her and had her put to death as well. He turned her leg into a fiddle and had her head paraded around his dining room table in a drunken state while searching for a new instrument. Yang's Prime Minister Yang Yin made sure that there was always a pool of condemned inmates easily available for him to kill because Yang enjoyed to murder people when he was intoxicated. After a disagreement, Yang threatened to marry off his mother, Empress Zhou, to an elderly barbarian, demonstrating how rude he could occasionally be toward his elders. Yang was devastated because he upset his mother by making a commitment to permanently stop drinking. Only 10 days would pass until the crazy mama's boy returned to the bottle. Teemo, the longest reigning Yuan monarch, became king of China in 1333 at the age of just 13 years old. It was only inevitable that Teemo would develop a ridiculous feeling of entitlement given his early age. He may have been influenced by his equally absurd chancellor, Bian, who advocated the execution of all Chinese with the top 5 most common names, or over 90% of the population. Teemo was more concerned with holding exclusive sex parties on the grounds of his palace while posing as a Buddhist monk. He also avoided his obligations by building a magnificent stage so that when he wasn't indulging in sensual pleasures, he could watch dancers perform at any time of day. Teemo would withdraw, spending his time on unimportant personal interests rather than the empire he was obligated to serve. Teemo was a talented designer who oversaw the creation of a complex water clock and a pleasure boat for his own lake in the 1340s, a time when his realm was plagued by floods and plagues. Teemo's lack of interest, however, would come back to haunt him when the founder of the Ming dynasty, the Chinese rebel Zhou Wanzang, took his capital at Dadu in 1368. Teemo was compelled to quit his fairy tale existence and end up in Mongolia, where he tragically passed away in 1370 from diarrhea. In addition to being an inept ruler, Sun Hao, who ruled China from 242 to 284, was also a vengeful madman who murdered everybody who disagreed with him. Sun took his new role as emperor seriously at first, pleasing the people by lowering taxes, controlling the actions of many of his corrupt officials, and releasing numerous concubines. However, he quickly got weary of his tasks and preferred to pass his time drinking wine, having affairs, and issuing death sentences. Hao was fixated on finding the families of his own officials who would make the most attractive woman of his realm into his concubines. Before any marriage, he commanded that the mandarin give their daughter to him so that he could determine whether or not to add her to his harem. A red-hot saw was used to cut off the head of one of Hao's officials, Chen Chen, who had reprimanded the maid of one of the emperor's favorite concubines for stealing. Hao was also fiercely protective of his female slaves. He was also a frightening binge drinker who punished people for abstaining from drinking. At one of his lavish feasts, if he discovered any of his officials not drinking, they typically lost their heads or were thrown into a river to drown. Hao occasionally acted with mercy and decided not to kill them, instead horrifyingly disfiguring their visage while they were still alive. Hao saved some of his deadly wrath for his own family, and this was made abundantly clear when a conflict broke out between his 2 sons, Sun He and Sun Ba. He deported Sun Ni to another region and ordered Sun Ba to commit suicide to end the argument so that he would no longer be bothered by it. Liu Ziyue. Liu Ziyue's act in high office, which lasted just 1 year in 364, was incredibly brief. He was a nervous king who often thought his royal kin were trying to get rid of him. His brief rule was consequently marked by homicidal outbursts caused by paranoia directed at his extended family. Before killing his 2 successors, he first forced his younger brother and rival for power, Liu Ziyue I, to commit suicide. The men who had remained faithful to his prior emperor, Zhou, were therefore all murdered by him. Siyue has many incestuous connections with his own bloodline while having a strong dislike and attraction to his family. He once made his aunt Liu Yingmei fulfill his lust by being forced to do so, killing his own uncle He Mai for plotting against his mentally ill nephew. Then, as a keepsake, he preserved his uncle's eyes in honey and gave them the name Pickled Ghost Eyes. Ziyue also loved sleeping next to his sister, Liu Shuyu, who received a number of attractive suitors from her brother in response to her complaint that it was unjust that he had so many concubines. In fact, open group intercourse was widespread, and Ziyue enjoyed perverting himself by attending with the princesses of his court. Ziyue was slain before he could do any more damage because his uncle Liu, Prince of Zhongdang, found Ziyue's offenses to be too much. King Zhou. King Zhou, who ruled the Shang dynasty from 1075 to 1046 BC, was a similarly erratic tyrant who took pleasure in other people's suffering, although he is best remembered for the delicacy of his royal gardens. In order for Zhou and his friends to enjoy the best vintages with their hands and choose the most delectable slices from the trees whenever they pleased, they had large pools of wine and forests of meat built in the grounds of his palace. Zhou would pass the time in his canoe while red wine lapped about him, indulging in excellent meals and by setting up weird and cruel games. One of his favorite things to do was to permit his concubines and eunuchs to enjoy the delectable pleasures available in his Garden of Wonders while they frolicked nude in pairs till dusk. When Zhou grew tired of doing this, he would pick 2 people at random and beat them until they were bloody. The victims were then put into a cart known as the pulp trough. Zhou also practiced the penalty of burning flesh with a hot iron as a death ritual. Prisoners of all grades, even high officials, were forced to hug a hollow bronze cylinder that was heated by charcoal from the inside, which resulted in an excruciating death. Additionally, his family was helpless against his psychotic wounds. He had his chest opened to determine whether a wise man's heart was large when his uncle and famed sage Bijan opposed his activities. Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian was the only woman to hold the position of Empress of China. The events of her rule, which spanned the years 690 to 705, showed she was just as insane as the men. She first ascended to the position of supreme power by strangling her own infant daughter and accusing Empress Wang of the crime so she could wed the emperor. Wang was drowned in a pool of wine, and after her husband was poisoned, she crowned herself empress. She promptly set to work eliminating all of her adversaries, putting an end to 15 family bloodlines in just 1 year. Many of them were even given the order to commit suicide in front of her. Her own terrible secret police, which operated a network of informants to smear out any potential foes, assisted her. When she wasn't destroying the nobility, she enjoyed the company of her own harem of male concubines. Later in her reign, as an elderly lady, she gave 2 of her favorite toy boys control of a court, turning it into a bacchanalian playground of open prostitution, drinking, and gambling. After her high priest, with whom she was sleeping, declared that she was the next reincarnation of the Buddha, she also appropriated Buddhist doctrine. Wu Zetian only differed from her male contemporaries in that she managed to survive her reign and abdicated quietly in 705 instead of dying during it. That's it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed making it. Make sure to subscribe and stay safe till next time.